A new year begins and so does a new decade, 2020. It's an important decade for the mankind. It's a decade in which we'll need to find answers to questions that hang over us. So what will the world look like in 2020? More importantly, which major challenges will shape this part of the region, Northeast Asia and Eurasia? South Korea, China, Russia three-way talks. Hello, I'm Jennifer Moon in Seoul, joined by my colleagues Yang Rui from CGTN in Beijing and Stanislav Varivoda from TASS Russian News Agency. This is 2020, the year ahead. The ties between Seoul and Beijing deteriorated in 2017 after South Korea accepted the establishment of the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD, system in southern South Korea. However, we are seeing signs of improvement in bilateral relations as we enter the first few months of 2020. Yang Rui, let me begin with you. Now, what is China's forecast of Seoul-Beijing relations in the year 2020?
Our relationship with the ROK is, first of all, to be shored up by the message that in the post-THAAD era, a lot of Chinese travelers are likely to go to Seoul and other parts of South Korea as part of the boom or resume the boom of the tourism industry. And then we're going to talk about what can be done together to mitigate the impact of the trade disputes between the United States and China. South Korea is, of course, a most important trade partner in Northeast Asia. A third factor is very much defined, actually, by whether tensions can be reduced across the 38th parallel between ROK and the DPRK. Everybody is talking about whether Chairman Kim Jong-un is likely to conduct yet another test of either the missiles or nuclear weapons to capture attention from the media the world over. So this is basically the picture that I can present to you, Jennifer, about what's going to happen to the bilateral relationship between China and ROK.
Well, the view from here, South Korea, is that we are seeing signs of improving ties between Seoul and Beijing. Now, in early January, some 5,000 executives and employees of a Chinese health, food, and equipment manufacturing company in Shenyang visited South Korea on incentive tours. It was the largest group of Chinese tourists since 2017, when China banned group tours to South Korea in the wake of the South's decision to install the U.S. anti-missile system in the country. And not only that, Chinese President Xi Jinping is slated for a state visit for the first time under the Moon Jae-in administration. And Chinese Premier Li Keqiang is also scheduled for a visit as the South Korea-China-Japan Trilateral Summit is set to take place here this year. So definitely hope is running high that Seoul-Beijing relations will be for the better in the new year. However, of course, playing a big factor, another area where South Korea recognizes that China plays a key role is in the North Korean denuclearization process, like you said, Yang Rui. Both President Moon Jae-in and U.S. President Donald Trump made note of the China factor in denuclearizing Pyongyang. Now, what is China's forecast of the North Korean denuclearization process in the new year?
In principle, the Chinese government has always emphasized that stability in the Korean Peninsula is of utmost importance. And then the process of denuclearization from day one of the six-party talks always captures attention of the news media in China. The prospects of denuclearization, well, that's also in the shadow of what happened in the Middle East. Iran, for example, is a different model for denuclearization, and yet it's been set back for decades since the targeted killing of General Soleimani. It almost triggered a war, a devastating war in the Middle East. So if DPRK authorities were to have followed the process between Washington and Tehran, they would have been taken aback seriously by the prospect that without being armed to the teeth by nuclear arsenal, moves such as decapitation are likely to happen in Northeast Asia. I'm not talking particularly about North Korea, but I'm talking about the revolution in military theories in the Pentagon. And that's horrible for the DPRK. So I'm a bit pessimistic about rekindling and restarting the process of denuclearization. Plus, under the pressure of impeachment, as well as the upcoming elections, President Trump may not devote as much energy as what he did to the denuclearization with DPRK. The Chinese government says over and over, we need to have a nuclear-free Korean Peninsula, period.
Now, what about Russia? Now, Russia and China, Stan, have been friends of North Korea, allies of North Korea for a long time. Now, Stan, as a Russian correspondent who also has experience living in North Korea, what is your forecast of North Korea's denuclearization process in 2020? What is Russia's stance?
Well, it's very difficult to predict what will happen in 2020 since there are so many factors involved. For example, North Korea is quite reluctant, at this time at least, to continue speaking to the United States. And it seems that it has taken the waiting position, and no big change will happen until the result of presidential elections in the United States. As for the Russian position, the Russian government is pretty much on the same page with the Chinese government. The stance is that the Korean Peninsula should be a zone free of nuclear weapons. And Russia is, together with China, came up with a plan, actually, for denuclearization of North Korea and the Korean Peninsula, step by step. The initial plan was revealed 2 years ago, and in last year, in November, the Russian Foreign Ministry also announced that they came up with the second part of this plan, or revised plan that they made up together with China, and it's going to be revealed quite soon. The details of that plan, as for now, the United States and other countries involved are looking through that plan, and they're going to say their opinion to Russia and China about that.
Mr. Kim Jong-un has put aside, in theory, the principle of a military first. He vowed to prioritize economic reconstruction in his impoverished country, but with the UN sanctions in place, what could be done by ROK, China, and Russia to help ease the economic woes in the DPRK so that it could be yet another form of security assurance for this paramount leader in Pyongyang? What can be done, first of all, by the ROK? Is there going to be a rise in the number of tourists from South Korea to your neighboring country across the 38th parallel to give a shot in the arm for the Pyongyang authorities?
Well,
Jennifer?
absolutely. That's a fair enough question, Young Ray. South Korean president recently signaled that Seoul may pursue inter-Korean projects, perhaps resume individual tourism, which could be seen as a softer stance on international sanctions. Some here view it may work in easing tensions, of course, and the South Korean government's stance is that that is a possibility, and this is something that we can, with our ally, the United States, could discuss and pursue. And we'd like to know the Russian stance on that stand.
During the last year and in this year, Russia keeps insisting on that the sanctions against North Korea should be lifted, at least partially, because obviously North Korea did some progress. They did not launch any missiles, ballistic missiles. They didn't do nuclear tests. And in Russian government's view, this is enough to alleviate some of the sanctions. Position of Russia is that if North Korea starts to develop economically and form closer ties with South Korea and Russia, and maybe join some trilateral projects that we already have prepared, then the risk of military conflict would be drastically reduced, because once you have cooperation, then you do not need a conflict.
Now, Young Ray, is that something that China would agree with? Are you on board with that idea?
Jennifer, in theory, I'm afraid the economic recovery of the DPRK is a card in the hands of President Moon Jae-in because it's an issue of whether this paramount leader, Mr. Kim Jong-un, is able to optimize the use of resources. Now, if ROK were to hold yet another round of war games with your ally Washington in nearby waters, that'll be, a move that will put Pyongyang on high alert. That will give rise to hostility. And therefore, the DPRK is less likely to prioritize economic construction. It would turn to the old tactics of teeth for teeth, blood for blood, and there's going to be escalation of tensions. So what do you think of the prospects of having more military drills between South Korean troops and the American armed forces? Because there is a large, formidable forward military presence by Washington in Northeast Asia. What's going to happen in this area, Jennifer?
Well, Yang Rui, as we know, that is not in the South Korean government's cards right now. As of now, South Korea and U.S. has not begun or resumed its military exercises around the Korean Peninsula as of yet. However, there is the presence of the 28,500 troops, American troops here on the Korean Peninsula. However, as for the military drills, South Korea has repeatedly told North Korea that we have halted those with the U.S. to show goodwill to North Korea. And we'll have to wait and see how we can ease tensions on that front with North Korea, perhaps with the easing of international sanctions, if that can be done, if that can be agreed upon between the two allies, South Korea and the U.S. Now, for those of you just joining us, you're watching our New Year's special program, 2020, the New Year Ahead, along with our colleague at CGTN in Beijing and TASS, Russian news agency. Now, defining issues that will shape 2020, number 2, economy 2020, U.S.-China trade war. Now, endgame for China. After more than 2 years of rising tension, the U.S. and China have signed a deal aimed at common trade frictions. The agreement has been hard-fought, but it's unclear how much economic relief from their trade war it will offer. Yang Rui, where does the inking of Phase 1 trade deal with Washington leave Beijing?
Both sides, Washington and Beijing, deserve credit for having the guts, vision, and wisdom in signing Phase 1 trade deal. Trade deal is better than trade war, by the way. For China, we promised to buy up to $200 billion worth of goods, agricultural produce, and perhaps Boeing planes and automobiles, energy, so on and so forth. That's good news for the creation of jobs and for giving a boost to the stock market. Look at the bullish performance of New York Stock Exchange. And there's also a positive sign of a bullish recovery in the Chinese stock market. This is very positive. This should be given an applause. So in general, we, along with the United States, are moving in the correct direction. We take the right side of history.
Well, of course, the U.S.-China Phase 1 inking was closely watched by all countries around the world as there's two superpowers. Trade war affects other countries around the world as well. Now, its impact on the South Korean economy, although it may be a relief on a wider scale, and South Korea's KB Securities predicted that the deal would boost global economic growth by 0.1 percentage point. Some experts here in South Korea say it might not be good news for the export-driven Korean economy. That's because as the Phase 1 agreement contains, like you say, Yang Rui, provisions where China has to buy $200 billion worth of goods from the U.S. over the levels of 2017 during the next 2 years, and $77.7 billion of which must come from manufactured goods such as vehicles and electrical equipment and machinery. China will perhaps buy less from other countries, likely including South Korea. And therefore, it also leaves a dangerous precedent since new trade agreements now may contain those provisions that one country has to buy a certain amount from another country instead of letting the markets work out its magic. Now, my question to Stanislav, how did or does the China-U.S. trade war impact the Russian economy?
Well, for now, we only can say that it did not benefit Russian economy. some experts, when the trade war just started, some Russian experts predicted that it would be a good opportunity for Russia to get some benefits from that. For example, to expand trade and to replace some goods that were that China and United States were at war with. But it turned out that it didn't happen after all. On the contrary, with the Russian trade with China has even a little bit decreased if we speak about trade of gas and mineral oil. So the experts are still counting the exact figures of the impacts of the trade war on Russian economy, but it looks like it will cost Russia about between 0.5 to 0.3 of GDP in last year.
Well, one new growth engine that will definitely drive the economic growth forward, experts say, is a new technology, which brings us to our final keyword that will define 2020, new technology, new frontier of power. Now, 2020 will be the year of 5G, and the decade begins in which we'll see great advances in the fields of artificial intelligence and quantum computing, which may radically alter the economic system, security policies, and power relations. Now, what are some key strategic tech trends of 2020? Let me ask you, Stan.
Well, I would say that there's everything that is connected with the fourth industrial revolution. So this is the 5G technology, the self-driving cars and navigation. This is telemedicine and nanotechnologies and the Internet of Things. I think I would say that those are the major ones.
So, as we saw at the onset of 2020, at CES 2020, we've seen everything from artificial humans to flying cars, flying vehicles, to robotics, to IoT. So this really is a really new frontier, a new era of tech trends. Now, I'd like to address this question to both of you, Russia and China, in terms of your collaboration between the two. Yang Rui, you had a question for our Russian correspondent.
Well, in the outer space, it seems we have a broad area for cooperation and a partnership, quality partnership between Moscow and Beijing. We have our own version of the Beidou satellite navigation, and you have your own. Is it likely that we're going to join hands and explore what can be used to improve our communications for scientific civilian use? Do you think in this particular area the Russian authorities stand ready and could share dividends of your research?
Well, I think that both Russia and China can benefit a lot from mutual cooperation, not only in the space, but in many other sectors of science and technology. It is a common knowledge that Russia has got good technologies and good fundamental science, whilst China has a very good experience and it's really good at commercializing them. So I think that could be one of the points for joint cooperation when the Russian technologies would be commercialized and sold by Chinese partners, and that would benefit altogether all of us. And as far as I know, that the two countries already have a big program for scientific and technological cooperation. We exchange scientists, and there are about 20 big scientific projects that are mutually funded by Russia and China, and the results are going to be exciting. So I think that since Russia and China are becoming closer in recent years, this is one of the developments that we cannot ignore and that we should put more effort into cooperating in this in science and technology.
Jennifer, the issue of national security suggests quietly that we are likely to go back to the Cold War because take the issue of 5G and Huawei as an example. You are not a member of the Five Eye Alliance. However, you are a closest ally of the United States since the Korean War. Now, where will South Korea stand on the issue of 5G? Will you have to take side with the United States if you were to come under pressure from Washington and the Pentagon directly, and you will not use any of the technologies from Huawei? What is your position?
Well, I'm sure you already know, Yang Rui, we have not banned Huawei from this country, and we definitely hope that we will not be put in the position to choose between one or the other. So definitely that is something that we'll have to wait and see, but it's not a scenario that we'd like to choose from. However, let me pose this scenario to you. Now, one vision of the future: in half of the world, driverless cars built by Baidu and connected by Huawei's 5G wireless networks carry passengers who shop online with Alibaba and post selfies on WeChat. Now, in the other half, those activities are dominated by companies like Amazon, Google, Facebook, Tesla, and Ericsson. Yang Rui, is this a possibility?
I don't dismiss the prospect that we're going to have a parallel market. No one can possibly prevent China from carrying on our own R&D, our own scientific research. For example, the latest report by McKinsey shows China's spending on domestic R&D rose from about $9 billion in the year 2000 to $293 billion in the year 2018, the second highest in the world, thereby narrowing the gap with the United States. We will never ever underestimate the diversity of a possible technological warfare. Look at why Huawei has been barred from their government approaches and procurement programs. We would also be very careful. We would think twice, to give a second thought to whether it's wise to import American-made, US-made software, because we have our own military concerns, we have our own national security concerns. Whether this can be viewed as protectionism, I'm not sure. We are all spied on, by the way, and espionage is an industry as old as prostitution and taxation, isn't it?
Well, all countries with sovereignty has got their security concern. Now, Stan, I'd like to pose you this question. Now, since there is a possibility, like Yang Rui said, with this emergence of a digital Cold War, do you think that there needs to be a digital alliance, a new kind of alliance that needs to be formed around this fourth industrial revolution standard?
I'm not sure that forming some sort of alliance would save us from, let's say, the electronic espionage, etc., and other threats to cybersecurity. But at least the Russian government is also concerned about this issue. And in recent years, a lot of measures were taken to boost the cybersecurity of Russia. For example, in case the global internet network fails, then the Russian segment of internet would still keep on running. And it was made to prevent the negative impact on Russian banks, banking systems, and trade, and etc., and other important networks. So I think also a few steps were taken by the government that banned using foreign-made software on the computers of governmental institutes. That's also a big step forward. And etc., etc. It's still going on and still amended, but I think Russia is becoming more self-reliant in these terms.
Well, definitely 2020 will be a landmark year as new and emerging technologies have the capacity to change our lives. And if they're used correctly, they can improve the way we live, work, and do business. If misused, they can create problems ranging from small disturbances caused by automated software to a large-scale security breach. So on that note, we will have to wrap up our New Year special. 2020, the new year ahead. South Korea, China, Russia, three-way talks. I'd like to thank my colleague Yang Wei at CGTN in Beijing for your participation in the talks, as well as our Stanislav Varivoda from TASS, Russian news agency, and of course, all of you for staying with us all throughout. Many thanks and bye-bye. 2020 is right here.